Hello and welcome, I'm your CodeMonkey. In this lecture we're going to learn something extremely important. Let's learn about naming rules. This is a very important lecture that you should definitely refer back to whenever you have any questions. Following good naming rules is something that will make you a 10 times better programmer. So first, what exactly are naming rules? These are really just the rules you define and then follow while writing your code. It is extremely important that you are consistent in applying your rules. You don't want one class in your projects to be written a certain way and a different class using a completely different naming scheme. That would create a ton of confusion and make it really hard to read the code. So naming rules and writing code correctly is very important. One mistake that I see a lot of beginners do is they send me some code and ask why it's not working. Then I take a quick look and see all the code written in a very messy way. Some functions are in lowercase, others using snake case. Some fields are in Pascal case, some in camel case. Always remember, code is case sensitive, so it is really extremely important that you write the code correctly. If you change a character from lowercase to uppercase, then you are suddenly referring to something completely different. If you are a beginner, always keep that in mind. Code is case sensitive, so don't just write code semi-randomly. Write it properly as if you were doing some kind of English test. Now with that said, when it comes to naming rules, you can use whatever rules you want. Different people like different rules. For example, some people like to use a prefix in variables. They like to add an underscore or m underscore. Or other people like to use a postfix. Some people like capitals for constants, camel case for properties, snake case for fields. Which, by the way, here are the definitions for those terms. Pascal case, this one starts with a capital letter, and then it is lowercase, and then a capital for every word afterwards. Then camel case, this one also has a capital for every second word, but the first one is lowercase. And finally, snake case, for this one you just use an underscore to separate the various words. These are usually the various ways you have of naming some kind of symbol. And like I said, the specific rules you follow don't necessarily matter. Every rule can be valid. The most important thing is just that you are consistent in always following through your rules. So define some kind of code style and always stick with it. For me, here are the rules that I follow and the code style that I use. For function names, I like to use Pascal case. This is also the C# standard, so always capitalize the first letter of every word. Then for the function parameters, for that I use camel case, so it starts lowercase and then uppercase after every word. Then for properties, this is something that I'm coming to cover in detail in the intermediate section. For these, I use Pascal case. For constants, again, another thing I cover in the intermediate. For this one, normally use uppercase snake case, so everything is uppercase and use a little underscore to separate the words. Events are in Pascal case, and then fields, these are in camel case. Then another one of my personal rules is something that I mentioned in the beginning lectures, which is the position for the opening of the curly braces. Now personally, I do like opening it on the same line, but some people prefer to place the opening on new line. I know some people have some really strong opinions about this, but really this is just the visual style that I personally prefer. It's probably due to the fact that when I started learning programming when I was 10 years old, I was writing some Mirk scripts which usually use this style, so I'm very used to it and I like it, but it's really just a visual thing. If you like the curly brace on new line, then by all means go ahead and use it. And for some more very useful general rules, first is spend time deciding on a proper name. Don't just use the first name that comes to your head. Actually think what would be the proper name for this symbol. Also, do not use single letter names. A lot of beginners like to use this just because for some reason they want to be as compact as possible. But remember, the goal with code is not really to be compact, it's to be understandable. And single letter names usually are terrible. The only exception for that would be iterators on a for loop. For those, it's perfectly fine to use just an I or a J. But for pretty much anything else, use a proper name and not a single letter. Related to that, also don't use acronyms or abbreviations. Those might seem really clear to you right now when you're writing the code, but in a few weeks when you yourself get back to the code, you might not remember what those mean. Again, don't be afraid of being verbose. If the most accurate name you can come up with is somehow 20 characters long, then really that's a name. Remember, you don't get bonus points for writing extremely compact code. So always value making your code readable and understandable, even if it requires functions and variables with very long names. And the final extremely important rule is simply don't be afraid to rename things. If you come up with a name and later on you come up with a much better name, then just take a second to rename it. With Visual Studio Shortcut, it's insanely easy. You just place the cursor over something like, for example, the player class. Let's say instead of this being used just for players, let's say it was also used for enemies. So I want to really name this unit. The shortcut is Ctrl plus RR, and it shows up this window, and now we can easily rename it. And yep, look at that, it renames every instance of this type. So renaming things is really super easy, so definitely make sure to do it. If you come up with a better name, come back and rename that symbol. Always remember, code is not fixed. It is meant to adapt and grow as you work on it, and part of working on it is refactoring and renaming things, so don't be afraid to do that. Okay, so these are my general rules and the code style that I personally follow. Like I said, you don't have to follow my rules. Figure out what works for you and follow your own rules. But naturally, here in this course, I won't be using my code style. So if when following this course, you're not sure how to write some type of code, come back to this lecture and watch it again. Like I've mentioned many times, the code that I teach you how to write in my courses, that is on the same level of quality as my professional Steam games. So as such, this lecture, this topic on naming rules, this is extremely important. If you just follow these rules, or whatever rules you can come up with, if you just do that, you will save yourself a ton of headaches.